Today's session is going to be about building awareness and reconnecting our mind to our body, a relationship that is severed by our modern world, the way we sit at our desks, the way we interact with our screens, and the way we isolate ourselves and try to compartmentalize our problems in our lives. My name is Omar, and sometime around the end of medical school, between my last year and my internship year, I started feeling like I was living in a glass box. I was severed from the world. I could not feel any kind of sensations, and I felt like I was isolated from people and from the things that I enjoyed. I was isolated from my feelings. I felt like I had everything going for me in life, but having grown up to be the overachiever that I was, I started feeling like this isolation was my fault, that I had to do something about it, that I had to start exercising more, had to have more hobbies, go out more, that I will feel something when I achieve another thing. And that kept feeding a lot of my fears and a lot of the way that I went about life. Welcome to the Human Recovery Lab, where science-backed ideas meet real human stories about how life's hardest moments can become our healthiest comebacks. Had you met me somewhere, you would probably see a doctor-to-be that seemed to be successful, that seemed to have a lot of things he's passionate about, to have been provided a very privileged life by loving parents, and to, on the surface, seem to have like this perfect life. But had you really gotten to know me, you'd realize that I was a self-loathing individual who felt inadequate and was really driven by nothing but other people's opinions. And that was causing a lot of paralysis in his life. Who was an addict, felt depressed most of the time, and really had troubled relationships, and was mostly a guy that was beating himself up behind that facade. And I walked around really feeling completely numb to life. I had short bursts of aliveness due to external events that got me going, but then I would fall back into this kind of general monotone of gray. And it was something that I was trying to fix with my doctor brain. And I started having some symptoms shortly thereafter. I started having depression. I started having a lack of appetite, a lack of libido, narcolepsy. I started feeling a sense of fatigue and a disinterest in life. And I also started developing a lot of back pain that I could not understand. So I felt that I was having these experiences when I was 25 years old, and all I can think about was that there's something wrong with me. It's clearly my fault. There's something I have to do. And I looked for the medical professionals that can help me fix things. And I learned in medicine that there's definitely diseases of the mind, there's diseases of the body. And so I looked for the medical community to find answers to that. And I realized that the ones that I needed were a psychiatrist for my mental health and a neurologist and a spine expert for my back. And so the psychiatrist met me for 20 minutes and prescribed me Prozac. And the neurologist did so many tests and x-rays, and I went to like several back specialists and chiropractors, and they all told me that everything looks healthy, but I didn't feel healthy. And I realized at that point that I had learned so much about sickness in medicine, but I hadn't really learned about health or how to maintain it. That's when I started really wanting to find other answers outside of what I was presented with. And I went on a depression and back pain roller coaster. I started experiencing slight improvements, and then I would go back to more back pain. I had to inject myself with pain medications, and that's how I kept it going. So I kept numbing myself more just to be able to cope with life. And ultimately, I started finding a path towards a reality that Dr. Gabor Mate summarizes in his book, A Myth of Normal, which I only was exposed to recently, of course, and wish I learned then. And he says, body and mind, while not identical, cannot be understood separately from each other. We can ignore or deny this paradox, but we cannot escape it. And that had become a reality as we started developing more scientific approaches to a holistic view of what disease means. And the science is very clear right now that this idea of the connection between the mind and the body is not some woo-woo concept. There is very clear evidence that links emotional disturbances and trauma at an early age with autoimmune diseases, especially in women that feel repressed in their lives. Another example is that there are certain types of cancers that come in men that were sexually assaulted when they were young. And so it goes across genders and races. And depending on the wounds that these factions of society carry, a lot of diseases seem to be concentrated there. First piece of awareness is really that a disease is not something that you should carry the burden of psychologically as something that you brought to yourself or that you even have. Rather, it is a manifestation of what wants to heal inside of you. And that is a very new awareness in our collective consciousness that I wish I knew back then when I was dealing with back pain and depression. And the first thing that I found, the first track that I found towards healing was functional medicine. When I learned about this idea that lifestyle can be used as a medicine, and that mental, emotional, and spiritual constituencies in our brain or our mind or our consciousness directly impact assimilation of food, digestion, and inflammation, and many more physiological processes that I used to study separately. And so there was this constant separation wound in medicine. I, as a doctor, was separate from patients, and therefore it was like a very jarring experience to become a patient. The different departments were separate from each other. The different organs were separate from each other. And this is really good when we're trying to control or manage a disease or, quite frankly, build a business around healthcare. But it is not helpful when we are trying to approach ourselves, and the idea of a path of well-being or healing is a path of wholeness, ultimately. And wholeness includes everything that we are and that we desire and that we were, including where we come from and what our backgrounds are. And so functional medicine really offered a path towards that point of view, which got me really fascinated by the process. And I started really working on different habits for my mind, different habits for my body. I started exercising. I started really trying to use like these kind of lifestyle changes and hacks, if you will, as they are referred to improve my health. But after a while, I realized that I continued being plagued by these feelings of inadequacy, especially when my habits would drop. So I felt that I was again tapping into a lot of beating myself up when I would fall off the habit bandwagon. So I would only feel better if I was 100% on my habits. And ultimately, it was as though if I had stopped doing these habits, I would fall back into depression. And so I was constantly living in the fear of falling back into a depressive episode. And a few years later, I had a pretty big breakup that led me down a path of wanting to learn more about psychology because I was experiencing so much pain and I wanted to understand how I can deal with it, as frequently breakups provide us with. And that led me to Carl Jung and his work around the depth psychology, but also the concept of the shadow, these parts of us that we keep in the back of our mind and don't want to see. And I ultimately stumbled into this method called internal family systems, the kind of concept of us having multiple sides and versions and parts of us that have different kind of needs and agendas that we can actually tap into and befriend, holds a huge stigma when it comes to society, because we tend to see people that have multiple personalities as people with multiple personality disorders, right? So it has a stigma of reminding us of schizophrenia and many other more subtle versions of that. And that is the revolution, really, and the way that
internal family systems, or IFS, has changed the way I see the world and many others. And it's an evidence-based psychotherapy model developed by Richard Schwartz. And to quote him from his book, No Bad Parts, which is a great intro into this methodology, he says, the mono-mind paradigm has caused us to fear our parts and view them as pathological. We shame ourselves for not being able to control them. In other words, we hate whatever gets in our way. And this was really revolutionary for me because it suddenly took me away from the idea that I am whatever I was feeling and gave me a path to identify with more than one MO in my mind. And so I started being aware of the overachiever in me, for example, and how he was the one beating me up when I dropped off the habits. He was the same guy that was beating me up in medical school, telling me that I need better grades. And I started seeing the different patterns of how this mental chatter really affects my life. And it also helped me start seeing the depressive side of me as also a part of me that had a very important message that was asking me to dig deeper into what I was doing with my life rather than something that I needed to control and needed to fix with medications. And it's really that process that started giving me a feeling of confidence in myself, because I started being aware of the different elements that I had going on inside of me, the different superpowers that I had lost over time. But also, it gave me confidence in being especially able to deal with depression in a way that did not feel combative and did not feel futile. And that's when I started becoming much more outgoing and also tapping into a certain sense of happiness that I had not felt ever since I was a child. And so I felt more like myself. I started to love that guy again, and he was still problematic in some ways, but I realized, he's not such a bad guy after all. And I did not need to fix him, but I could negotiate with him when we needed depression and when we needed to go on with our lives. And this was a very quick change to a problem that existed for a very long time. Dr. Kristen Neff, who is the person who has researched self-compassion the most, she wrote many books, but this is from her book, Fierce Self-Compassion, How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive. She says, when we open to the reality of what is, even if we don't like what is, it helps almost immediately. And that was my experience with IFS. I had already understood the different parts of me and how I interact in the world, and that improved my relationships. And that's why I really believe in it and have built a whole wellness program around that process, because it has helped me and continues to help so many people around the world in a way that allows us to accept ourselves, which is the fundamental teachings also of Eastern traditions and mindfulness practices that all have their own lineages, and also mindfulness has become a really well-studied area right now, much more so than when I was in medical school. But I also realized that internal family systems and this whole kind of game of mindfulness had a certain limitation to it. And that was that I could easily fall into intellectualizing that part, meaning that I was still trying to sort out my mind. I was still playing a mind game. And I was not addressing the rest of my body at all. I was sitting in therapy, talking to the therapist, and it made me feel good. Like, these sessions gave me insight that helped me move with confidence, but there was something missing. And that piece was something that I only found many years later after another breakup, this time a divorce. And it just so happened that I stumbled upon a great teacher of somatic therapy a week after my separation. And I had experienced that through several episodes of severe back pain that happened throughout the few years before my divorce. And I didn't know what to do. And I went back to injecting myself with painkillers. And it was something that I did not understand until I met Stacey Haynes, who's now a mentor and a teacher of mine. And Stacey had agreed with me that internal family systems was a very powerful methodology, but it kept us in the mind, sitting in a chair like I am now, rather than moving and expressing and identifying what was going on in our bodies, because our bodies speak. And that was the teaching of somatics, that there's an access into the mind through the body. And that completely changed the game for me and is what I'm advocating now, is that somatics and internal family systems really work together to build an awareness that we did not have access to as human beings in the modern world that we've built. These ideas are not new. These ideas are actually things that we've adopted from very old teachings in the world. Somatics is really what started melting the ice around this invisible glass box that I was living in. And for the first time, I started realizing how numb my body had been. And I was accentuating that with various substances, with TV, with junk food, with porn. And there was so much that I was avoiding in my body because it was too painful to witness what was actually going on. And to quote Bessel van der Kolk, the person who wrote the very famous The Body Keeps the Score book, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, he says, in order to change, people need to become aware of their sensations and the way that their bodies interact with the world around them. Physical self-awareness is the first step in releasing the tyranny of the past. And that is also what I learned in the Vipassana retreat. And it's part of the Vipassana tradition, is to observe the mind-body phenomenon and how they are not just interconnected and interlinked, but they are essentially the same thing. The mind and the body are a reflection of one another. And that's what started putting me on a deeper sense of healing, because my body was still locked in its own patterns of pain and of shame and of addiction. And the idea of the body having that made sense when I started understanding or going back to the concept of the fascia, which is this interstitial connective tissue that runs underneath our skin and takes a lot of nutrients to different parts of the body, but it connects every single part of our body to one another. And so it makes sense that we can access our whole being through sensations, whether subtle or gross, in different parts of the body. And so I started being exposed to a lot of these, and that developed my awareness of my body in a way that I had never experienced before. So now I have an awareness of tightness in my chest. When my belly feels a little bit distended, I'm aware of that. And I started seeing how these connect to certain thought patterns, which I had uncovered earlier. And that's the fascinating thing. So to quote Stacey Haynes, I know this may sound strange, but so often what we are reacting to is not being able to tolerate what is happening in our own sensations, emotions, and experience. We react to get rid of the feeling, to push away the sensations because they are associated with something intolerable, painful, and uneasy. Increasing our ability to allow for sensations and emotions give us more choice and decrease our reactivity. That's from The Politics of Trauma by Stacey Haynes, Somatics, Healing, and Social Justice. I highly recommend that book as well. And this was ultimately what brought me to the old wound of medicine and what I was feeling in this glass box, that I not just separated myself from the world, but I separated myself from the body because I was not able to feel these pains. I did not have all these tools. And that's why awareness is the first path towards freedom. And a real sense of freedom includes being able to see what is, in terms of things that we like and also things that we don't like. And to quote Boyd Vardy from this book, Cathedral of the Wild, An African Journey Home, who's a line tracker and a life coach, and he says, lines aren't used to other creatures tearing them down. It's a good tactic for life too. Even if you're terrified inside, stare it in the eye. And that is the real path towards healing in all ancient traditions. But somatics and internal family systems together provide a real path that we can take in this modern world that makes sense to us, that is also studied and scientifically proven, so that we can actually develop it and expand it and have it make sense to us in the way that we live our lives. And so ultimately there are many ways to achieve this, and the freedom of internal tyranny and beating oneself up and the negative ruminations can be dealt with in many ways. Pharmaceuticals and medications are one when we really need them. There's also psychedelics, mindfulness, yoga, sound healing, fasting, and even religion. There's an endless number of things that can all be a path towards expanding our awareness. And that's why I wanted to start this essay and this series of essays with helping you understand that awareness of the mind and the body is the first step. So what I hope you take away from today is that by increasing your awareness of your mind, your body, and how the mind-body is the same, you can start living a life that is more in tune with your own nature. You can start building the capacity to regain old powers in parts that we have shunned away because of societal shame. We can become more innovative, and we can bounce faster in conflict because we have this huge awareness and an ability to articulate it to our partners and to our colleagues. Now, enough conversation. Let's get to practicing something together.
There are a few ways to connect your mind and your body to each other. And the basic technique is to have them both do or focus on the same thing. And there are several ways to do that. One way is to really focus on the sounds that your ear is hearing. So just stopping and being silent and noticing what sounds are in the room without really attaching any meaning or labels on them. So you might hear tweeting or a door creaking. And by focusing your mind on what you are listening to, you're starting to tune your device that way, towards harmony. And now we'll move on to another technique, which is the breath, one of the most popular ones, where you don't really need to change your breath or practice any sort of pattern, but all you need to do is bring attention to the breath. And perhaps feeling the temperature going in and out through your nose. And keeping your mind on the breath as it comes in and then goes out. Again, no need to change it. Just noticing if you get distracted and coming back to the breath as the main focus. And this is another way to harmonize your brain and your body. By focusing your mind on your chest expanding and on the breath leaving and entering through your nostrils. You're again sending information from your body to your brain and updating the database to let it know that you are safe. And the third way that we can do that is through sensations. So now let go of the sounds, let go of the breath, and try focusing your attention on your right toe, your right big toe. What is that sensory field down there? What is going on if you focus on that one toe? You might be feeling some itching or some burning sensation. Just try to name it, again, like the sounds, not really putting any label or meaning behind it. And just notice whatever that sensation was. Putting all your attention on that one tiny square on your toe. Is it tingling? You might be feeling just the sensation of your socks around your toe, or the floor or the ground. Whatever it is, creating some space for it to come up. And just naming it just like we named the sounds. That is the basic technique. When our brain and our body can focus on the same object without falling into a lot of stories behind what the sensation is or what the sound is or how our breath is. So now that we've tried out a few of these ways, now bring your attention to a situation in your life that might be challenging, such as maybe a slightly triggering conversation at work or an argument that you had with someone that you live with. Something that's maybe weighing on your mind. And bring that scenario to your mind so that you can clearly see what was going on in that scene, as though you're walking into a movie of your life. And you are rewinding that movie and going back to the scene and observing yourself interacting with that person. And focus on yourself rather than the other person. Focus on yourself receiving, being part of that conversation that triggered you. And now try to name the emotion that you're feeling. This could be an aggravating emotion, such as anger, jealousy, disappointment, resentment, sadness. Or it could be an experience of joy or relief. Whatever it is, just try to identify what that feeling is. So beneath all the stories you have about what's going on, what is the deep emotional response that you are feeling right now? And see if you can name it without falling into the story around the emotion. So just notice sadness, anger, and now as you watch yourself experiencing that emotion, now try to drop deeper again and see, is there a sensation in your body that you feel right now? So when you think of anger, where does that anger live? And what can you notice about it? So if it's in your chest, which is a common place for anger to live, what quality is it? Is it a burning kind of anger? Is it a calm kind of anger? Or perhaps you have sadness and it lives in your back or your belly. So whatever sensation that comes up, just remain focused on it. What is it? What is happening in your body as a response to that emotion, which rose as a response to that situation? And if you do this continuously and consistently, what you'll start realizing is that a lot of these heavy emotions that we tend to spin on and continue ruminating around rather than solving can be resolved by allowing this emotion to rise within you and then noticing the sensation that is associated with that emotion. And therefore, the fire in your belly or the agitated chest or the pain in the lower back can be watched and monitored. And that way you process a lot of these emotions rather than being stuck in the realm of the mind that continues using the prefrontal cortex to loop over and over again. So remember the 3 techniques that we covered by using sounds or the breath or sensations as an anchor. You can then start having more of an objective take on what is going on. And I'd love to invite you to try that the next time you're in a difficult conversation. After the conversation, after you have some time, stop to think what the emotion is underneath whatever content you're experiencing, and then try to go even deeper into the sensation and just observe the sensation. Watch what happens to it. Notice if it changes, and then come back to the emotion. See how that has changed as well. And then ultimately, You might start realizing that your relationships over time, the more and more you practice this, are starting to change as well. Be the first to know about new content, events, and our 3-month program by signing up at thehuman-.com/subscribe. And while you're there, you can take the Human Dash assessment. It's free, science-backed, and it shows you how stress and habits are shaping your health right now. And when you finish, you'll get an instant PDF report personalized with your readiness and self-compassion scores, outlining exactly where you stand and the first step you can take towards recovery.